information with a whole lot of truth. Remedy Revolution is here for you. Ooh. And now here's your host, Erin Paige.
All interviews presented on the Remedy Revolution podcast are designed to provide information and inspiration only. Guests of the podcast may present opinions and anecdotes which are solely their own. And as always, before beginning any treatment protocol, please consult with your preferred medical provider. Hey, everybody, this is Erin. Welcome to the Remedy Revolution podcast. Today's guest is somebody that I met very recently, actually, but somebody that I've been following for a very long time. I've admired his work from afar. His book, The Vaccine Friendly Plan, I think that was published in around 2015, perhaps. He could correct me if I'm wrong. And this guy has just been an amazing pediatrician for so many people, a real voice in the dark where a lot of people felt very alone. And I'd love to welcome you to the show, Dr. Paul Thomas. Thanks for coming on today. I really appreciate having you.
Well, thanks, Erin. It's a real pleasure to be on Remedy Revolution podcast.
Yeah. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, I would love it if you would just kind of give us a brief rundown. How did you get into this space of primarily vaccination versus unvaccinated children? What brought you to that space?
So I didn't start there. I went to Dartmouth Medical School, and all I was taught about vaccines was how amazing they were. They had eradicated smallpox and polio, and never taught what was in the vaccines, just accepted that the information we were getting from the CDC was solid and they were the experts. And who was I, even as a pediatrician, and I'd gone through residency training, who was I to question them, right? If you're listening, question them. If we've learned anything from COVID, it's like, wow, these letter agencies, WHO, CDC, NIH, when it comes to the vaccine area, they cannot be trusted. It's unfortunate, but they are absolutely somehow captured to promote a narrative that's simply marketing, which is vaccines are safe and effective and nothing could be further than the truth. But it took me a long time to get there. So I'm bumbling along as a traditional pediatrician, spouting off that exact narrative that vaccines are safe and effective. Oh, it's only 1 in a million kids who are harmed, because that's what we're told. That's what all the literature says. And if you go today to most pediatricians, that's what they will tell you. And they believe it, which is just shocking to me, but they do. So they're not trying to mislead you. They are themselves misled. And it took, for me, actually, a series of things that happened all around the same time. Right around 2000, I read the article that Andrew Wakefield wrote, which suggested there might be a link between MMR and autism. And I remember reading that going, a link between vaccines and autism, because autism was just starting to explode back then, 20 years ago. And it was this weird thing, the most severely affected kids, the nonverbal, in pain, in distress, very, very challenging cases. And all we were saying as pediatricians and the community was, well, we don't know what's causing it. And I just couldn't accept that. So I went on a deep dive. Simultaneously, my youngest son was school age and struggling. He couldn't learn. Nobody was home. Something was clearly wrong developmentally in that particular area of his brain. And then I started seeing it in my patients. So I'm attending conferences that are specifically trying to figure out what's going on. I'm seeing a bit of it in my own home. My mind is open now. Oh, and they also moved. So my very first thing was, it's the mercury. And for a while, that was a big thing. And mercury was bad. And it was probably a big cause for a lot of kids back 20 years ago. But around 2000, 2001, the pharmaceutical industry removed the mercury. Except for the multi-dose flu shot, they effectively got rid of the mercury, which was good. And I was so excited, I thought the problem solved. Well, at the same time, almost the exact same year, hepatitis B vaccine, which used to be given to teenagers, was moved to newborns. And I remember walking through the hospitals, because I would go to the hospitals to see newborns. And that's where I would run into fellow pediatricians. And I would say, what do you think of this crazy idea of moving hepatitis B to newborns? Newborns in America are not at risk for hepatitis B. You catch it from sex and IV drug use. And that's just not something that babies do. If their birth mother is positive, is infected with Hep B, sure, there's a significant risk. And in that less than 1%, probably about 0.1% in this country of moms who are positive, sure, maybe it makes sense to do not just the Hep B vaccine, but the HBIG immune globulin to protect that baby.
Mhm.
But for 99.9% of babies born in America, that shot is pure toxin. It's 250 micrograms of aluminum, zero benefit, all toxicity. And even most of my peers back then would go, yeah, it doesn't make sense. And yet today you ask any pediatrician, they go, oh yeah, it's the right thing to do, blah, blah, blah. They give bogus reasons for it.
Mhm.
So I started waking up, and then I had 4 patients in 4 years in my own practice who were normal at age 1 and severely nonverbal autistic at age 2. And that was like, I can't do this anymore. I cannot be a part of causing harm. I wasn't 100% sure, but I was pretty darn, your intuitive sense, just like parents, if you've had a child who's probably vaccine injured, or you're pretty sure they're vaccine injured, your intuition's probably right. I mean,
Right.
We now have a lot more evidence than I did back then, but it was that slow waking up process. So fast forward another 7 years, right around 2015 is when I was working with Jennifer Margulis to write the vaccine-friendly plan. And we documented in there, in the non-vaxxed patients, zero autism. In the partially vaxxed who were following what we ended up calling the vaccine-friendly plan, there were 3 cases, but they resolved. So one of the features of the vaccine-friendly plan is if you see any developmental challenge, stop. Don't keep vaccinating.
Right.
And most kids, when you stop, if you stop soon enough, don't just keep on hammering them as their health is deteriorating, most can recover. So, that's a cause for hope for some folks, but you don't get problems at all if you don't vaccinate. So when I saw that data, I was like, okay, I got to write. I tried to actually publish it. I could not get a journal to take the research publication. So I said, all right, I got to write a book. So I wrote the book, and fast forward a few more years, the medical board's coming after me almost monthly with requests for this and that. They were just, my legal fees were going through the roof. They were just basically harassing to an incredible extent. Then they wrote a letter, January of 2019, saying, prove that the vaccine-friendly plan is as safe as the CDC schedule. And I literally laughed reading that. This is ridiculous. The CDC's never proven that anything they do is safer than anything else,
Right.
Nor have they ever compared the CDC schedule to doing nothing, but they want me to do this work for them. And I was kind of upset. But then I thought, wait a minute. Actually, somebody suggested to me, just do a QA analysis. Look at every patient born in your practice and look at the outcomes. It was a brilliant suggestion. So I hired an expert outside guy to come in. He was a neonatologist, pediatrician, but mostly an informatics nerd. This guy had set up medical record systems in 25 countries around the world. He comes in all dressed in a suit and tie. And back then I just wore Hawaiian shirts. And I'm going, relax, dude, get some sweats. I'm putting you in a cubicle to look at computers for a week. And at the end of the first day, he comes up, Paul, I know I'm not supposed to look at the outcomes. I'm just supposed to be gathering the data, but it just jumps out at you. I said, what are you talking about? He says, your unvaxxed kids don't get sick. So the data was clear to him. We ended up publishing it. This was the largest vaxxed, unvaxxed real world study ever published in a peer-reviewed journal of public health, international journal. That ultimately got retracted, but oh gosh, you might be able to show the images to your audience. I usually have one handy. What did I do with it? It was really dramatic, the findings. I'm sorry. Here it is. This here. Have you seen that before?
I've seen it on your website. So maybe we could just it is at doctorsandscience.com. Is that correct? Can
That's
you find
correct.
that?
So
okay, great.
We can point people to that, but the orange lines show the cumulative increasing incidence of all those conditions: asthma, eczema, ear infections, lung infections, you name it. ADD, ADHD, zero ADD, ADHD in the unvaxxed. It was like, I knew it was less, but zero. It was shocking. So that was a wake-up call.
Just for our audience, so what were the aggregates from what years approximately?
So this was the entire 10 and a half years that my practice was open, from day one until the day we closed that data set, which was in January or early February of 2020.
Okay.
So we gathered that data. It took us almost a year to get it published. What I have to stress to the viewers and our listeners is the vaccinated kids in this study were in my practice, where we do informed consent. So they weren't CDC vaccinated. These were actually vaccine-friendly plan vaccinated, meaning they got about half and they were spaced out more and less aluminum exposure. What I thought was, well, I know to this day it is a safer schedule for sure than the CDC,
right?
But it's still not safe enough, is what this data showed. Okay, this was like the wake-up call to the fact that there may not be any safe vaccines. And I'm not anti-vax, I'm pro-science, but here's the science. This isn't hearsay. This isn't conspiracy. The science is showing us that the vaccines are causing harm. And they're causing harm to almost everything that people don't even think about as related to vaccines. I mean, who thought that asthma or eczema, well, I've kind of suspected for a while, but most doctors, most people have no clue or even reason to think that all these chronic conditions in childhood, including infections, by the way, are more prominent in the highly vaccinated kids. So that was my final wake-up call. And 3, 4, 5 days after that article was available online, I get a call from my attorney. And he says, you can't practice medicine anymore. Your license has been emergently suspended. Like, bam. And, then there's just the whole last 2-3 years of fighting the medical board and reaching the point where I relinquished my license. It was the prudent thing to do based on all the legal advice I was given. So I'm suing the medical board. That's an aside. They need to be held accountable for their illegal activities. So we'll try to hold their feet to the fire, but it's tough. They claim absolute immunity. They apparently, supposedly, have the same immunity as a judge. But what's weird is they're the ones who investigate, they're the ones who prosecute, and then they're the ones who judge. So judge and executioner are all rolled into one and having absolute immunity. That's tyranny. And
Right.
Unfortunately, that's what medical boards are doing to doctors around the country. Those who stand up against vaccines, and especially those who stand up and try to help COVID patients, either whether it be with ivermectin or just speaking the truth about how disastrous those COVID jabs have been. They're almost universally losing their licenses across the country.
Yeah. So something I mentioned to you, which is very near and dear to me, is so a little bit of background on this. My son, 4.5 years old, had a PANDAS onset, PANS. We now know it was initiated from a mosquito bites, which we believe caused Lyme disease. However, he was never vaccinated. And so we didn't have those assaults on his system. He was a home birth baby. He ate organic food. He, like, his favorite, in the grocery store, sometimes they let you take a free fruit or vegetable. He would pick a head of cauliflower and just eat that raw.
You did everything right.
Right. So anyway, after he was initially diagnosed, I started a group on Facebook, and initially it was just about 30 moms. We were just chatting about alternatives because the conventional treatment for PANS and PANDAS was, antibiotics until the age of 18 and IVIG, very invasive treatments and things that we didn't really see a whole lot of results with, for one. And number two, we didn't feel like that made a whole lot of sense. So we were looking for alternatives and things that might actually help our kids. Well, in that group of 30 moms, several of these moms actually had a very similar story to mine and my son's. And I found that so intriguing because, when we're looking at, as you have, the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated, and we're seeing obviously far less disease in the unvaccinated population. But I have to wonder what would happen if we took it further up the chain. So really look at, what are these kids in these studies? What do they look like genetically, for example? Looking at a child like my own son, I think would be pretty interesting because, what is it that predisposes them to some of these illnesses? So I'd love to hear some of your theories on perhaps why that might be.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And thank you for sharing your story. And I'm sorry that you've had to go through that. PANS is so difficult to manage, as I'm sure you know. We believe, and you correct me, here's what I've learned, even as a pediatrician who was teaching other medical students for quite a while. Parents who have a child who gets a rare condition that's severe become the experts. Mm-hmm. You could probably educate me and most pediatricians on PANS because that's what you do. Your kid is suffering and you're looking for answers, so you'll look everywhere. Right. Whereas the traditional doctor is just going to read the journals that are very limited in their understanding. But I believe we're thinking it's sort of an autoimmune thing, mm-hmm. right? As sort of what's going on. So then trying to figure out what's causing autoimmunity. Vaccines, especially aluminum-containing vaccines, number one on the list.
Right.
So this would be why I would imagine most cases of PANS do occur in vaccinated kids. Mm-hmm. Is that what you found, or what
Yeah, it's interesting because I do have a fairly large number, and I don't know, I'm a homeopath. So, people seeking out homeopathy are probably more naturally minded in general. So perhaps that would be why I'm seeing more of these kinds of cases. But I will say, in my practice, I do see a lot of vaccine injury, no doubt about it. Probably about 70 to 80% autism spectrum disorders, ADHD, allergies, you name it, all vaccine injury from my perspective, very clearly, and most often from the parent's perspective as well. But I will say that the cohort of these unvaccinated kids who are getting some of these more serious conditions is growing, in my
Mhm.
view.
Yeah.
Um,
So to go to your question of genetic vulnerability, I think especially in your situation where you have done it all right. I mean, eating organic, so pesticides, glyphosate, et cetera, herbicides, huge cause of triggering gut issues. And then that triggers autoimmunity with delayed food sensitivities or delayed food allergies, whatever you want to call it, and direct toxicity because you've got a leaky gut. So but you were eating organic, right? So
right.
you didn't vaccinate. You eliminated that risk factor. You're eating really healthy. We eliminate that risk factor. Unless there's something that we haven't even considered, and there's a bunch of those things we can speculate on. Genetic vulnerability is a big probability, right?
Mhm.
MTHFR is just one that sort of classically makes you vulnerable to toxins. I don't know if you looked at your family's MTHFR status.
Yeah, absolutely. We've done a pretty deep dive. Actually, I had a podcast with Bob Miller. I don't know if you're familiar with him, from Tree of Life in Pennsylvania. And I've actually had treatment with him as well as my son. And he's gone through our entire genetic makeup. And some of those more traditional SNPs are definitely present, MTHFR. However, my genetics are actually worse than my son's. So it is very interesting looking at comparison. I also came down with Lyme disease at the same time. One of the other perhaps conditions was I did have diagnosed mono at 18 years old. So Epstein-Barr virus was undoubtedly passed down to my son in vitro. So, things like that I think are potential, but I would be very, very curious, to go through some of this data and see if we can't, maybe we could do a study.
Oh my gosh. Studies are so difficult to do. I've been interested in this. So I have had some experience with Lyme, probably not near as much as you have, just because you've had to deal with it. Again, when you deal with something, you really do deep dives. But a lot of times there are other associated infections that seem to go along with it.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole constellation of folks who are dealing with that, it's messing up the immune system. So right there, you may have sort of identified. I mean, I think if we assume that Lyme is just tick bite related, infection related, right? If that's truly all it is, then that's not necessarily genetic vulnerability, although your genetics might not allow you to handle the infection as well as somebody else, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And so that's where the vulnerability comes. And Lyme is a lot more prevalent than people are willing to acknowledge. It supposedly started in Lyme, Connecticut, or at least that's where it was found, thus given the name. Real prevalent on the East Coast, less so on the West Coast where I am, but it's still here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, I can only just support what you're finding. I think you're spot on.
Anyway, it's just something that has been interesting to me. I do feel like there's, as I said, this really growing cohort of parents and children who we don't feel like we have a place, if you will. I think a lot of the conversation does revolve around vaccines. And for those of us who didn't vaccinate, who feel like we did everything right, then we feel like there's not an answer there for us. So it definitely something perhaps interesting in the future. So,
well, let me comment on that.
Sure.
I think whether your child has autism or any autoimmune mediated condition, and the list is growing, or whether it's a vaccine injury of some other kind, we're all in the same boat, honestly and realistically, and we need to heal our kids. We need to do everything possible to allow them to overcome the challenges they're facing, restore health, if you will. And we are in the same group when it comes to that, because you go to the mainstream docs and they don't have a good solution. They're taught to label and treat, right? And the treatment's pharmaceutical, and there isn't a pharmaceutical answer for autoimmunity except suppress the immune system, which is probably the worst thing you could do unless you're in a really life-threatening situation. You suppress the immune system, you're inviting cancer, you're inviting all sorts of infections. So we're in the same group, honestly. I don't want you to feel so isolated. We've got to heal the gut. We've got to really optimize detox pathways. We've got to optimize proper nutrients, through which we're already doing, it seems, with organic whole food nutrition. You were spot on there. But I think that we can work together in that complementary alternative world so that you don't feel alone.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate that very much. I think I'm at the place now where I'm just going to tell everybody who'll listen. So that's what all that is. But so in moving forward, one of the questions that I get a lot, especially as kids start to get older, parents who have seen their child regress into PANS pandas, sometimes into autism, but it does seem to me that PANS pandas is the one that comes on later in life. And so as these parents start thinking about getting their kids into middle school, high school, college, I'm often asked, well, should I get them the, HPV, meningitis, all of these vaccines that come up? And in my opinion, I usually gently, but I let them know that I do not think that that is a wise decision, because, you're dealing with an autoimmune condition already. Why are you going to introduce another pathogen into their system and, make them work even harder? It doesn't make sense, even from a very, very basic perspective. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Well, you're absolutely right. Absolutely. You should not give an HPV vaccine to anybody, period. That was the worst shot on the market until they came out with the COVID jab, which I don't even call a vaccine. The HPV has Merck's proprietary aluminum that is also found in the hepatitis B and the hepatitis A vaccines. There is something specifically harmful about their aluminum. Dr. Exley's kind of the world's aluminum expert, and maybe he could explain it. I can't. It's a little over my pay grade, but there's definitely something going on. Newborns who get the Hep B, much higher rate of autism and autoimmune issues. But the HPV in particular, it's causing ovarian failure, so destroying fertility for women. But it's also literally killing people and triggering the most autoimmunity we ever saw until COVID. I think COVID beats it by far now. So that one, and here's the other thing. We don't even know if it's ever prevented a single case of cancer. So the whole premise for which it was rolled out was sort of theory and speculation. HPV cancers take decades to develop. That vaccine was on the market for only a few years and they're claiming success. Well, I remember reading some of those articles. They were junk science. I mean, there was absolutely no way you could know, but just the way they were interpreting and misinterpreting things. So yeah, don't ever let anybody talk you into HPV for any reason. It's just pure harm. No probable no benefit and massive harm.
Right.
But the other vaccines, most of the non-live virus vaccines, which is probably what you're going to be talked into, have aluminum. And aluminum is the number one trigger of autoimmunity. Schoenfeld's book, Vaccines and Autoimmunity, I think that's what it's called, Vaccines and it's a masterpiece with hundreds of references. He was a leading immunologist out of Israel. And yeah, it's clear. Aluminum causes autoimmunity. If you already have either a family history of autoimmunity or you yourself or your child is dealing with autoimmune issues, no, you don't add more fuel to that fire. That would be insane. And there's something about multiple vaccines or just stacking them, immune activation, they call it, which just sort of overstimulates the immune system. If you're having autoimmunity, you're already living in an overstimulated immune system state. So, if you want to just go with, now I'm not licensed. I am just giving information. I'm not diagnosing. I'm not treating. Run any ideas I might share past your trusted healthcare provider. But for me, speaking for myself and just looking at the data and the literature, it just doesn't add up. If you weigh risk and benefit, I don't think it adds up for anybody. But if you're autoimmune affected, it absolutely doesn't add up. The risks are just too great.
Right. I agree. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Actually, I just heard your interview with Dr. Pierre Corey, who also coincidentally has two children who suffered vaccine-induced PANS, they believe now. But you guys were talking a lot about the book Turtles All the Way Down. So I wanted to mention that Zoe O'Toole, who's a personal friend of mine, was on the podcast not too long ago. And we spoke about how one of her children was completely unvaccinated and also developed PANS. So there are many of us out there, but
Yeah.
okay, so what do we do now? So obviously you've run through, all of your patients, looking at some of these kids who now are, I presume, severely affected with things like autism, allergies, autoimmune disorders, and things like that. So I know that you have a new endeavor called Kids First for the number 4 ever.com. And so tell me a little bit about that. How are we helping people get through all of this once we've already crossed that bridge?
Yeah. That project, I mean, I've always been about putting kids first. And in the mainstream world, until I woke up to the power of integrative and alternative and complementary medicine, I don't know that I was doing such a good job, honestly, of putting kids first, but my heart was in the right place. So discovering that there are ways to help kids, and it's focusing on all 4 areas of physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, throw in educational with the mental part there. We need, as parents, to really champion all areas for our children. We are their protectors. We are their guides in this journey on this earth. And let's face it, it's gotten complicated out there, and it's gotten rather toxic. So we have to double, triple, quadruple our efforts in all those areas. Well, that's overwhelming for anybody. And so Dee Dee Hoover and I have teamed up together. She comes from a background of wellness coaching and massage and body work, but she's really gifted in the coaching aspect so that I can coach around almost anything pediatric. The area I seem to be helping people the most is the vaccine area, because if you have fear of the diseases for which we have vaccines, or your family members or close friends are so fearful of those diseases, and your doctor's telling you to vaccinate, you don't have the confidence to make a decision that goes counter to that narrative. And so I'm able to walk people through, and this is what I used to do in my practice anyway, true informed consent. Here are the actual risks, the actual benefits. And you also have the alternative, doing some or none. And when you really go through the true risks of the disease, which are very low, the diseases for which we have vaccines, they're almost all gone. And you go through the actual risks of these shots, these vaccines, which are actually quite high when you look at all health outcomes, as opposed to just what the studies that the pharmaceutical companies threw together. You start to realize that actually vaccinating is very risky. Going unvaccinated is actually a very healthy, safe choice. It's not absolutely zero risk, but it's minuscule risk. Which risk are you comfortable with? And I'm able to walk parents through those decisions one by one, looking at each disease for which we have a vaccine. Therefore, you can make an informed decision about that vaccine. And that's really individualizing it to the person that I'm talking to. So I do a lot of that. We also coach, either Dee Dee or I are together, on a host of topics. I mean, newborns are challenging. Birth is a traumatic process, and you get your baby home and you might be struggling with latch or feeding, or they're fussy, sleep problems, colic, you name it. There is something you can do that's highly effective and has nothing to do with going to the pediatrician. So we coach on a lot of things that are related to that. And then I think another area that we can coach on has to do with, once you get into the preteen, teen age group, this angst, this anxiety, this not fitting in, this not knowing where I fit in, how to navigate socially what's going on in our world.
Right.
I think we can help kids there as well, and parents. Sometimes you're coaching the family, and depending on the age of the kid, you might be coaching a parent more than a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that so much because, obviously the name of the podcast is The Remedy Revolution. I find that so often, in this world, we tend to focus on what happened instead of how do we get out of it, and it comes from a place of desperation and frustration. And I completely understand that. But to me, the only way through all of this is by offering hope, is by giving people opportunities to really share and to, share stories of healing and stories of, that are positive and move us in the right direction, if you will, instead of this, unfortunately, coming from the PANS world. I think, as you probably know, there's a lot of focus on awareness, if you will. And the awareness is very important. We need to let other, practitioners and people know and understand what these conditions actually look like. But that can be very devastating for a parent with a brand new diagnosis, just to see all of those kinds of stories instead of the stories of hope and healing. So I appreciate what you're doing very much, because I think it's so needed in this world. So good on you. I'm glad there's someone out there.
Well, and good on you for Remedy Revolution and trying to bring some positive as well. I struggle with that with my own podcast, which it used to be Against the Wind, and now it's With the Wind, Science Revealed. When I lost my license, I go, well, I've got time on my hands. I can't see patients. I might as well do something positive here. So I started that show. It's a weekly show. And my desire is to try to bring positive, like you're talking about. And it's not easy, because so much is going on out there that sort of needs to be set straight. The record is pretty messed up. But yeah, we've got to focus on love. We got to focus on the positive.
Yeah, absolutely. So after going through everything that you've been through, to me, it's just a downright criminal. Is the persecution has got to be incredible. And I know that it has to weigh on you personally, right? Like, there's no way, if you're a human being with a heart and, that's still beating, there's definitely, that's got to be very difficult. So how do you personally get through all of that negativity and the persecution that has gone on for you?
A great question, and perceptive of you to ask. I was always a very optimistic, the glass was always half full. I mean, the world could be seemingly falling apart and I would be fine. This one took me to my knees, because simultaneously with losing my license, it looked like my practice was going to fail. I was having marital issues. I'm divorced now. I mean, I had everything falling apart at once. And, when your faith gets shattered and you don't reconnect with source, you're in trouble. So, whatever your belief system is, if you're listening, you've got to reconnect, right? So for me, it happened. I was fortunate to have, Dee Dee Hoover, who we work with now. She coached me, actually. I mean, when I was going through this, she was just walking beside me and just helping me process and challenging me when I was being negative, because I needed that. I'd lost my natural ability to just see the positive and have faith, right? So it's faith over fear, but that's easy to say, harder to do when you're, everything seems to be falling apart. So you reach out for support. I was fortunate enough to have, everybody at my office was loving and supportive. I had the coaching that Dee Dee was doing, which, whether you're an adult or a teen and you're going through angst, she's incredible. She's absolutely incredible. So that's one of the services we offer at Kids First Forever. But yeah, it was having support and then reconnecting with love and light and spirit and God. I mean, let me tell you, it ended up being the biggest blessing of my life. Now I have a bunch of kids and they don't all see eye to eye with the fact that I'm no longer with their mother. So that part's been a little challenging. That's a whole separate personal challenge that I'm working through. We're making some progress, but on a personal level, I'm as happy as I could be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important. It feels good to stay true to yourself, to remain in integrity, no matter how challenging that is. So definitely. So something we like to do here at the Remedy Revolution, this is new, and Dr. Jim Meehan was my guinea pig here. He's my buddy in Oklahoma.
I love Jim Meehan.
Yeah, Jim has been on the podcast. This was the second time, but we've met in person a few times as well. So anyway, he was my guinea pig. I let him know that when I was a young adult, I wanted nothing more than to be an actress. And so for me, I used to watch something called Inside the Actor's Studio, where they're given a series. Every guest is given a series of rapid fire questions. So in the spirit of fun and education and positivity, I have a series of 8 questions I would like to ask you. rapid fire answers, and whatever comes out of your mouth is what comes out of your mouth. No judgment at all. So
Here we go.
All right, here we go. So if you could choose only one natural remedy for the rest of your life, what would it be?
It would be love, but if we're talking about supplements, it would be vitamin D. She should not go without vitamin D.
Awesome. Number 2, tell us something most people don't know about you.
I was the head boy of my elementary school. I almost drowned 3 times, and I was arrested in middle school age for distributing literature that was revolutionary in what was then Rhodesia.
Wow, interesting. Okay. If I were to compile a playlist of happy music, what song would you suggest be added?
That cute little boy's rendition of Three Little Birds.
Fun.
You got to
What's
look
your
that
favorite?
one up.
All right, I will. I might compile an actual playlist here. So, what's your favorite guilty pleasure?
Probably ice cream.
Hmm.
I know better than to do sugars. It's just
Yeah.
not good for your health, especially as you get older, like I'm getting. But boy, a warm, I like moist brownies. You get a
Yeah.
warm, moist brownie with a huge scoop of, fatty vanilla ice cream. It's just, it's right there.
Hey, we got to live a little sometimes, right?
Absolutely.
What's the most influential book you've ever read?
So most recently, and you already mentioned it, was Turtles All the Way Down. The reason being, makes it crystal clear that no vaccine has ever been properly tested with a placebo for safety. And I knew that kind of, but boy, when I read that book, it was like, holy mackerel, this is for real. Going back to the very beginning. So yeah, and that one's just recently out, folks. Turtles All the Way Down, I would get it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I actually have 2 copies right here. And in fact, for those of you that are listening, I am doing a giveaway. And that is one of the awesome prizes. So if you would like to be entered in that, you can go ahead and go to heartwinghealing.com, scroll down to the podcast section, and enter your email in order to be entered to win that giveaway.
You know what? I just thought of something. Since you're talking giveaways, your listeners, just if they end up on Kids First Forever and they want a coaching session, just mention Remedy Revolution Podcast and we'll give you a 50% discount.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for doing that. I appreciate that very much. And I'm sure our listeners will as well. All right. So in that spirit, what does the word revolution mean to you?
The revolution I first went through as a child was in Africa. It was apartheid-like system in Rhodesia where I grew up. And I was a part of that revolution, standing up for freedom for those who were suppressed. And I think we're at it again. You're doing it with Remedy Revolution. I've been doing it with this vaccine awareness, risk awareness, and trying to stand up against authority when they're just flat out wrong and oppressive. So it is standing up for the truth, standing up for the unrepresentative, those who don't have a voice. And it's effective when we link arms and we become a revolution.
Absolutely. And what does the word remedy mean to you?
Well, remedy is to make better, to allow healing. It's something that works with your body. If we're talking about a remedy for your body, to enable your natural healing mechanisms to work. I mean, it could, I suppose, be a antidote. If you had a toxin for which there was an antidote, that could be considered a remedy as well. But I tend to think of it as enabling the body to heal using the amazing powers our bodies have. I didn't know before we started this podcast that you're a homeopath, so you're all about remedies.
Absolutely.
Yeah, homeopathy intrigues me. I know very little about it except that I love it. And when it works, and I've seen cases of it working, it just seems almost miraculous. But isn't that what energy work is anyway? Whether it be
Absolutely
prayer, spirit, homeopathy, it's a beautiful thing.
So lastly, if you could impart one piece of wisdom onto our listeners, what would that be?
No fear. So faith over fear. But I have to qualify that because it's too easy to say. Be cautious about what you're putting your faith in. Okay. I think, if you were raised in the church or biblically or spiritually, faith in that level of connection, yeah, sure. But our society has become so commercial. We've put faith in our doctors. We've put faith in the CDC. We've put faith in government. we've put faith in the wrong places with people and institutions that are completely captured or compromised. So trust yourself, trust your intuition, and put faith where it belongs. Love, spirit, God, whatever version of that resonates with your soul, that's where you put your faith, and you can start that healing process.
Absolutely. So for those of you interested in learning more about Dr. Paul Thomas, for getting some of the information on that vaccinated versus unvaccinated data, you can visit doctorsandscience.com. Additionally, if you are interested in coaching with Dr. Paul, you can visit kidsfirst4ever.com. And I'm sure he would love to see you there. Thank you so much, Dr. Paul Thomas. It's been my absolute pleasure to be able to speak with you. And I hope we can have this conversation again in the future.
Thank you, Erin. It was my pleasure.
All right. Take care, everyone.